We can do it. Yes, we can. We can change things throughout the land, but we all must lend a hand. We can do it. Oh, yes, we can. Oh, your neighbor over there, a bit bewildered, but he cares. He just doesn't know what to do. Join together and then there'll be two. There are others all around, scattered throughout the town. Reach out and you will see your numbers swell to 3. We can do it. Yes, we can. We can change things throughout the land, but we all must lend a hand. We can do it. Oh, yes, we can. Now together.
Well, I was born in Ohio, and my dad was a congregational minister. He had refused to go into the military as a chaplain, and even supported conscientious objectors. So that did make him very popular in rural Ohio. So for the first 5 years of my life, we moved to a different small town every year, where people were looking for a more red-blooded pastor that could support, the war effort. So it was very small towns where there was maybe one red light in the town, one traffic light. And I went to the public school and had some friends that lived just down the street that we had a lot of fun. We didn't even have indoor plumbing in those days. So we had an outhouse out back. A very simple little house. When I went back some years later, it was pretty tiny. And then we actually, for a year, lived right by a lake called Deal Lake. And that was really a tough year for me because I had scarlet fever, which could even be fatal at that time. And also fell out of a tree and broke my leg. So, but the church actually sent me a present every day to open while I had the scarlet fever. And my brother who was younger, kept looking, hoping that he had scarlet fever so he could start getting a present. And when I was 7, our family went to New Mexico on a long camping trip, and where my uncle was working on helping. He was the safety engineer for developing the nuclear bombs in Los Alamos. And so we spent the summer together. It was my first introduction to Native Americans and their powwows, and finding, I think it's called chard, which was old pieces of pottery in the fields. And then after that trip, we moved to Iowa, which was another small town. There was not even paved roads. Again, we had an outhouse. I can especially remember there our garden. My mom loved flowers, and we helped her. That was where I really began enjoying riding my bicycle. My dad and I would go out on long bicycle rides, I suppose a couple miles out in the countryside. And it was while we lived in Iowa, the day before Christmas, that my dad got a call from the American Friends Service Committee saying that there'd been a war over in Palestine, Israel, and they would like him to go and help distribute food and medicines to refugees over there. And if he could go, he'd need to be on the plane within 2 weeks. So that was quite an amazing experience. I mean, Dad had never been on an airplane, never been out of the United States. I don't think I even knew anybody that had ever been on an airplane. So as our family tried to make decisions together about big things, so Dad really asked us as a family how we felt about him going off for 9 months. And then he, instead of the sermon that Sunday, he asked the church what they thought he should do. And we agreed, and the church agreed. So within 2 weeks, we were all on a train to Ohio, where my brother and my mother and I lived with our grandma in the same house where we lived in Ohio. And my dad went by train on to New York and got the plane to Palestine, and where he was in charge of a refugee camp in Gaza, getting food and medicines, tents for people that had to flee their homes. And it really made a very big impression on me. I was just 7 and 8 for that 9 months that he was gone. He'd given great sermons on loving your neighbor and who is my neighbor, the Good Samaritan story. And he not only gave good sermons, he actually was practicing what he preached. And these people that he had never met needed somebody to help get food and necessary supplies. And he was willing to risk his life to try to help do that. So he was very faithful in writing letters to my brother and me almost every week about what he was experiencing. And of course we felt very lonely without our dad, but we felt very proud that our dad was he was out there loving God's children in another part of the world that really needed care. So one of the experiences there in Gilman, Iowa, this was the name of the small town, I would walk through a park to the school each day. And one day in the winter, walking home, a bunch of boys, I don't know for what was the reason, but they started throwing ice balls at me. And my dad had given a sermon, I think the Sunday or just before that, on loving your enemy. So I thought, well, you know, this really hurts. But how am I to try to love these guys? So I didn't throw anything back, and I said something to the effect, look, I don't have anything against you guys, I'd just like to be your friend. And they threw a few more snowballs, and when they didn't get a response, they quit. And I went home, and from that trip to New Mexico, my most prized possession was a little letter opener with a gem, in it. And I decided to give it to the leader of this group of guys as a way of trying to love them. And my mom was quite upset that I'd given this very precious instrument to these guys that I didn't really even know. But they turned out become very good friends. So at an early age of 7 years old, I discovered that there are other ways to deal with people that are angry or upset or hate you than returning hate for hate. I suppose that my calling in life was decided that day, that cold winter day in Iowa with the guys with the ice balls, that I to try to love my enemies and try to overcome hatred with love, and to try to work for peace and justice in the world. That was a very important instance. Well, when my dad came back in the fall of 1949, when I was 8, our family moved to Pennsylvania, where my dad was offered a job with American Friends Service Committee, the Quakers, who had been organizing the work in Gaza and then later in Israel as well. And we lived in a cooperative community called Tangi Homesteads, which was started by people who had been conscientious objectors during the Second World War, and found a sense of community in their life in the CPS camps, and decided they wanted to continue that sense of community. So it was a wonderful place to grow up. There was about 20, 25 families, and really I was welcome in everybody's home, and we helped each other build our homes. We had work days. We played a lot of baseball with the other kids, which was really fun. My brother and I, starting at a very early age, 7th grade, me and my brother, 5th grade, built a barn for our goats and chickens and rabbits, and then built an addition to our own little home. So we learned practical skills very early on. One of the we had some good role models. One of the people in the community actually visited India quite often, a guy named Charlie Walker, and would come back and talk about his conversations with people that had worked very closely with Gandhi. And this was in the early 50s, when it was really a nuclear scare, getting ready for nuclear war. And that was in the days when children were supposed to get under their desks in case of a nuclear blast, etc. Well, there was a Nike missile site just down the road, 3 or 4 miles from our home, from our community. And so, inspired by some of these older folks that I'd gotten to know, I organized a vigil at this Nike missile site over Thanksgiving, where the kids, and I was, I think, 15 at that time, went down. We made signs, vigil at missile site, and fasted over Thanksgiving time, which was kind of a big step for young kids. And some of the kids were as young as 9 or 10. And we spent 2 or 3 days vigiling there at the Nike missile site. And most of those kids have continued to be involved in some way in peace and justice in our lives. My FBI file started there at that Nike missile site. I got my FBI records a few years later, and it starts out, David Hartsough, son of Ray Hartsough, organized this peace vigil at the Nike missile site. And it was quite interesting that they considered that so important. I had the opportunity to go to a Quaker high school, a Westtown school, and I had the opportunity to just meet many what I would call spiritual giants. We had a film called Children of the A-Bomb, where a young woman who had been in Nagasaki at the time of the bombing, and her face was severely disfigured. And she showed this film, which was really so tragic in terms of what had happened to the people there. And afterwards she said, "We of Hiroshima want to make sure that this never happens to anybody else in the world." And that was so impressive to me. Rather than hatred or wanting to get back at this country that had bombed her family and her community and her city, we want to make sure this never happens to anybody else again. And so they're working for the abolition of all nuclear bombs. So inspired by that, we started a public opinion poll, I guess is what we called it, where we would go around door to door just asking people, what do you think about nuclear bomb testing? Just to try to hear what they were thinking, and if they were opposed to nuclear bomb tests, we'd get them to sign a petition to the president, let's stop our bomb testing. I met Bayard Rustin, who worked with Martin Luther King, Ralph Abernathy, who also worked with Martin Luther King in Montgomery, Alabama. A.J. Musty, who was a giant of the peace movement. I got exposed to all these amazing people, and they were a beautiful role model for me. That instead of just growing up and getting a good paying job and building a big, getting a big house and a big car, etc., you could do something with your life to try to help create a better life for all the people on the planet, and certainly all the people in your community and nation. And they were world citizens. Their allegiance wasn't to a country or a football team or just their family. They really saw all people in the world as their brothers and sisters, and were acting on that belief. So risking sometimes their own life or their own jobs, carrying out what they believed in. So and there were Quakers had what they called World Affairs camps and seminars in Washington at the United Nations, where I would get to know other students who were doing something with their lives to try to help create a better world. Again, that was the early 50s, and McCarthyism was very, very strong. People, afraid to kind of step out of the normal, and to have that kind of community of people that were that I really felt resonance with was very, very supportive. We also went to weekend work camps in Philadelphia, where we helped fix up and paint homes of people living in the poor ghettos in Philly. And just seeing and getting to know people who our society had discarded. The landlords hadn't fixed their houses in 20 years. The roofs leaked. There was no place for the kids to play. Often no food in the refrigerator. And these were my brothers and sisters too. So that was a part of my learning experience, that this is very unjust. We can't live in a world, in a society that treats each other that way. What I got my fun from was participating in these weekend work camps, getting to go into these seminars and World Affairs camps where we got to go and visit people in the Israeli embassy and the Arab embassies, to the Soviet embassy and the U.S. State Department, and hearing all these different perspectives, and realizing that here people are so influenced by who their own nation is. Everybody thinking we are right. And how stupid it is to be preparing for war with one another because we don't like their government or have different perspectives. So at Westtown, I began organizing a morning meditation, organizing a belief into action group that would meet weekly, and then participating in the going around door to door. We went to demonstrations in Washington, D.C., and went to work camps. And the school, although it was a Quaker school, didn't really fully appreciate all the things that I was doing. And so they penalized me by telling me I couldn't go to the weekend work camps and stuff like that. The headmaster 2 weeks before graduation said, Hartsough, shape up or ship out. And well, that was an invitation to, I shaped up for the last couple of weeks, but I was ready to shape out. And starting that summer, I got to participate in a peace caravan where we went out to Kiwanis clubs and Lions clubs and churches, students from different parts of the world, talking about the need to somehow live in a world where we can live as brothers and sisters. There was a ship called the Golden Rule, which was, there were 4 Quakers who had decided to risk their lives sailing this small boat, the Golden Rule, into the nuclear test area to try to stop the nuclear weapons testing. And each of them wrote a letter saying why they were undertaking this journey. And when I read that, I was just so deeply moved that they cared so deeply about this issue. They're willing to risk their lives to try to stop it. Not hurting anybody else, not going to sabotage the bomb plant or whatever, but risk their own lives by sailing into this testing area. Well, when they were arrested in Hawaii by the U.S. government and were sitting in jail, together with others in Philadelphia, we decided to organize a peace walk from Philadelphia to the United Nations, calling on all nations to stop their nuclear bomb testing. So I recruited other students from Westtown School and other schools to walk that 90 miles or so from Philadelphia to the United Nations. And each night would stay in churches or friends' meeting houses and would talk, often give a public talk about what we were doing, and we talk about the Golden Rule. And really the need for all of us, rather than just sitting back and watching this insanity of preparing for nuclear war, to try to help shift this direction of our nation from Cold War enmity and preparing for hot war to looking at how we could live in a world as brothers and sisters. For most of the walk, well, we had quite a few people starting from Philadelphia, but for a lot of the walk, there were just 20 or 25 people. But by the time we got to New York City, we had hundreds, I suppose close to 500. And I remember we were singing, last night I had the strangest dream, as we walked down the street, which went for a couple blocks. And this was the largest demonstration I had ever seen or heard of. And I thought, oh, we can overcome. So at Swarthmore, there were only, I think, 2 or 3 people of color in the student body. And I thought, this is crazy. So one of the things that I did was to try to helped change the admissions policies. So more African American students, especially, could attend the university. That summer, after Swarthmore, I participated in a work camp, and that was 1959, the year of the Cuban Revolution. And the Quakers were organizing a work camp in Oriente Province, in a little village called Barhagua. And that's where a lot of the heavy-duty fighting had taken place. And Bautista, the dictator, had bombed a lot of the homes and the medical center there to try to instill fear, not to challenge his authority. And so what we were doing was rebuilding these homes and also a medical center and putting in a sewage system. This was in an area where it was mostly sugarcane being grown, and the people had 3 months of work a year cutting sugarcane, and they were very poor. And one day, the Sunday, the only day we didn't work, with one of the young boys, I went up onto the hillside, and here's these thousands of acres of sugarcane, and then here was a house with a golden roof in the middle. And I said, "Oh, what is that?" He says, "Well, that's where the American landowner lives." And here are all these folks that were just barely surviving and had great hopes for the Cuban Revolution. There was going to be agrarian reform, and they were going to get a decent life. And my experience of work camps in Philadelphia, in terms of injustice in the United States, this was my first introduction to the tremendous inequality in the world, the great wealth and superabundance in much of the United States. And here we were taking the sugar cane, didn't care about how the people there could live, and large landowners that were making all the profits. And so this was my introduction to the world in which we live, where if we're to have peace or consider ourselves human beings, we've got to really change our relationship, where we can really, where everybody has enough to eat, everyone can have clothing, schools for the children. So that was also very inspiring. Well, when I came back from Cuba, I heard that Howard University was, which was an African-American university in Washington, D.C., was looking for white students to integrate the other way. And I thought, well, instead of trying to get other people to do what I thought they should do, get black students to come to Swarthmore, I should practice what I preach and go to Howard. So that was my inspiration to go to Howard, and both the president and the vice president had been friends of Gandhi, and my dad knew them, and I thought, well, this would be a good idea. My mom didn't think that was such a good idea, and but she hated to see her son, quote, give up one of the best schools in the country academically for Howard University. Well, I did go to Howard starting the fall of '59, and it was a very, very important decision for me. Not so much because of the academic study, which, was good. It wasn't like Swarthmore, but because in February of 1960, the 4 students in Greensboro, North Carolina, African-American students, had decided they'd had it up to here with segregation and decided to go to a Woolworth's drugstore sat down at a lunch counter to get something to eat. And instead of getting something to eat, they were arrested and put in jail. And that was kind of a spark which encouraged students all over the South, African American students especially, to go and start challenging segregation in their own communities, mostly at lunch counters. So at Howard, we began, the first week, we just went to picket Woolworths in Washington, D.C., close to Howard University. And then we found out that in Maryland and in Virginia, surrounding Washington, everything was still segregated. Even African ambassadors traveling from New York to Washington through the state of Maryland could not eat along the highways or stay in the motels. So we started going to Maryland to get something to eat on Saturday mornings. And without fail, they would close the lunch counters, this African American friends and me from Howard. They would close the lunch counters, and then we'd hear the police sirens coming, and they would haul us off to jail. And rather than being scared or intimidated, we sang freedom songs all weekend, built our sense of community and our sense of we are a part of a movement where students all over the South are challenging this institution of segregation, which is treating people of color as second-class citizens. You know, the children couldn't go to the amusement parks. The people couldn't go to the theaters, drinking fountains, you know, restaurants, motels. And so Monday morning we'd be released and go back to school until the next Saturday morning. The state of Virginia had passed a law saying anybody that challenged segregation in Virginia could get 6 months in jail and a $500 fine. And so for most of that spring, we kept going to Maryland, where a weekend was much easier. Martin Luther King often came to preach at the chapel at Howard, and it was so inspiring hearing this man who really believed that we could help transform our country into a country of what he called the beloved community, where we could really live as brothers and sisters. And so that gave us great inspiration to continue the sit-ins. Well, in June of 1960, after finishing our final exams, nobody had challenged that segregation law in Virginia. And we decided somebody had to. So we got some additional nonviolence training and got up our courage and went to what was called a People's Drugstore in Arlington, Virginia, and sat down at the lunch counter. And as in Maryland, they closed the lunch counter. They just closed, sign, no food, no drink. And we ended up sitting there for 2 days. And it turned out to be the most challenging 2 days of my life. People came up and called us every name in the book. They put lit cigarettes down our shirts. People punch us in the stomach so hard we'd fall on the floor, and then they would kick us. The American Nazi Party came with their swastikas, and their signs say, "Is we or is we not apes?" And each time that something like this would happen, we would try to respond in a loving, nonviolent way. And toward the end of, which was often pretty challenging, toward the end of the second day, I was meditating on loving your enemies. And I heard this guy come up from behind me and he says, "If you don't get out of this store in 2 seconds, I'm going to stab this through your heart." And I looked into his face, and his face was contorted with hatred. And I had 2 seconds to decide, do I really believe in nonviolence, or is there a different way to try to deal with this guy? But we'd had a lot of experience, and I just looked at him in the eye and I said, "Friend, do what you believe is right, but I'll still try to love you." And it was the most amazing thing. His jaw began to drop, and his knife and his hand, which was right at my heart, began to drop, and he left the store. And so for a young 20-year-old, that was a pretty amazing experience about the power of nonviolence. Well, we then did something even more challenging. We went to the front door of that People's Drug Store and read a statement that we had written appealing to the religious and community leaders to use their influence to get the eating facilities open to everyone. And then this was the hard part. We said, if nothing changes within 2 days, within 7 days, we'll be back. And just to think that we could come back and do this again was pretty challenging. Well, some friendly media people got us out of there alive, and back across the bridge back into Washington. And at Howard, we literally shook in our shoes for 6 days, whether we had the courage to go back and do this again. And on the 6th day, we got a phone call that the religious and community leaders had met, had talked with the business leaders, and had gotten a commitment that the eating facilities would be open to everyone within 10 days. Well, that was the most, certainly up until that point, was the most joyful moment of my life. And it was the most important experience of my life, that when something terrible is happening, like segregation, like wars and injustice, instead of cursing the president or the television set or segregation, go find some other people that believe as deeply as you can, as you do about something, and go and challenge it and say, this has to stop. And the whole idea that we can make history. We're not just pawns of some power structure. We can help create a different future. So that's really what my life has been about ever since, inspired by that time at the People's Drug Store in Arlington, Virginia. Stokely Carmichael was one of the students who was often part of our demonstrations at Howard. And we spent, many nights in jail getting to know each other. Many years later, after Stokely, his time in Mississippi and his time all over the South, being treated so meanly, so unjustly, came to really, his words were, hate Whitey. You can't trust Whitey. Well, after I'd moved to California, he came out to speak at La Peña at a cultural center, and I decided to go and hear him, and he gave his talk, and then when he found that I was there, we just wrapped our arms around each other and went to the back of the hall where we're sitting, and had our arms around each other for the rest of the evening. And I was very grateful that somehow our human friendship and what what we'd experienced those years together at Howard was stronger than his ideological, hate whitey. And, we were both brothers. Many of the people that I was a part of that sit-ins in Maryland and Virginia went on to be on the first freedom rides in the South and spent time in Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and went through things that were even more harrowing than my time or our time there in the sit-ins in Maryland and Virginia. But I feel it was such a privilege to get to know these folks and it was very heartening and inspiring for us that we were not just kind of these isolated students at Howard University. We were a part of a movement of people all across the South, led by African Americans and primarily African Americans, who were really trying to create a different kind of world, a different kind of society in the United States.
As your numbers begin to grow, you're expanding what you know. You're a movement when you reach 5, and now watched by the FBI.